Hi, my name is Alicia Chavez. I am currently studying a master's degree in Applied Economics at Universidad Católica del Norte, Antofagasta, Chile. In this video, I will review a research paper conducted by Atuesta and Dusan Paredes on the topic, Do Mexicans Flee from Violence? The Effects of Drug-Related Violence on Migration Decisions in Mexico. I will begin by giving a brief summary of the main ideas of the paper: context, literature review, motivation, data, methodology, and results. Then I will share some final considerations about the strengths and challenges of this paper. Let's get started. This paper attempts to identify the existence of displacement in Mexico caused by drug-related violence. The authors begin by contextualizing this situation and state that violence in Mexico has increased since the federal government began the war against organized crime. The intentional homicide rate per 100,000 people increased from 8 to 18 from 2007 to 2008, and since then it has increased every year until 2011. However, in Mexico, there have been limited efforts to quantify the number of internally displaced population, which will be called IDP from now on. Just to mention some studies, in 2012, the firm Parametría suggested that the displaced population is about 1.6 million. Also, a survey conducted in 2009 by the Universidad Autónoma de Ciudad Juárez had as a result that in Ciudad Juárez, 230,000 migrated because of the escalating violence between 2007 and 2009. Internal migration due to violence has also been studied in other countries in the region that have suffered from political violence and civil wars. This phenomenon can be seen and has been studied in other countries such as Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Nicaragua, among others. I will not go any more deeply into the data and results of these studies. I just want to emphasize that there have been some effort to study IDPs in the region, and that there may not be that much data about this topic in Mexico, but there is enough information to at least recognize that migration caused by violence exists. Nevertheless, according to an investigation conducted by Sandoval Alarcón in 2013, local government authorities of some municipalities of Mexico denied the existence of IDPs, or simply argued that there is not enough evidence of displacement to recognize it as a problem. The authors of this paper suggest that migrants moving from violent to non-violent states are escaping from violence and are willing to sacrifice economic opportunities in order to gain safety. But what about those migrating from non-violent to violent states? The authors suggest that they are driven by better economic opportunities and less expensive cost of living at destination, even if the rate of criminality is higher at their destination. It is in this regard that the objective of this paper consists on evaluating the role of the wage differential behind the migration decision to and from states with different level of violence. In order to achieve this objective, the authors used three sources of data to carry out their estimations. 1. The National Security Council to define the level of drug-related violence at each state. 2. The sample of the population and housing census of 2010 to identify the internal migrants and obtain their wages and personal characteristics. And 3. The Income and Expenditure Survey of 2010 used to calculate the spatial price index at the state level. Based on these data sources, the authors organized and transformed this data in order to construct their regression model. They first had to classify states by level of violence. Then they had to identify migrants and type of migration, calculate the wage differential, and calculate price index. I will try to explain each of these steps in a clear and simple form. Please be aware that I will omit some details. If you want to study them in depth, please refer to the link of the paper and explore sections 3 and 4. The first step was to classify states by level of violence. The authors classified the states depending on the drug-related homicide rate per 100,000 people. They classified the states in three levels: high, mid, and low, for 2005 and for 2010. Then, the next step was to identify migrants and type of migration. For the purposes of this research, the authors had to define an internal migrant and a resident. Internal migrants would be those who were living in a state in 2005 and in a different state in 2010. Residents would be those who did not change their state of residence from 2005 to 2010. Then, migrants were classified depending on the level of violence of the state they were living in 2005 and on the state they migrated in 2010. The third and more complicated step was to calculate the wage differential. The authors had to compare migrants' current wage versus the wage if they would have decided not to migrate, or potential wage. This is the most complicated part. Actual wage is easy to observe in the census, but the potential wage is unobservable. Most of works have overcome this problem using the average wage differential. However, many have discussed that this approach can be biased. As I said before, we have an unobservable wage. And if the average current wage of residents is used, their characteristics may be different from the migrants and influence the result. To solve this, the authors decided to estimate a coarse exact matching, CEM, in order to identify a subset of residents who are the most similar to migrants. The CEM allowed them to work only with residents that are somehow similar to migrants, avoiding the potential problem related with selection bias. The characteristics used to match residents and migrants were age, gender, education, marital status, economic activity, housing status, and size of the community where they are living. Once the authors identified the current wage and potential wage estimated using CEM, they calculated the differential wage, which was calculated as the difference between potential wage and current wage. The last step before estimating the regression was to calculate price index. The authors built a price index in order to control for differences in the cost of living among states. This was calculated as the difference in rent price between the state where the migrant was living in 2010 and the state where the migrant was living in 2005. Finally, the authors constructed their model to calculate the probability of migration, according to the level of violence of the state they were living in 2005 and on the state they migrated in 2010. For example, the probability of migration from a violent state to a non-violent state was estimated regressing the binary variable H05 to L10 as a function of the wage differential and its square term, the price index between the two places, origin and destination, and its square term, and the characteristics of the migrant that were mentioned before. The square terms are included to evaluate any potential nonlinear effect derived from the control variables. After processing all this data, the authors obtained useful results. I will focus on the most remarkable. Results show initial evidence to support the hypothesis that the differential wages reflect the violence condition in each of the states. This table shows the average of the wage differentials in states with different levels of violence. As you can see, migrants coming from states categorized as high violence states have lower wage differentials if they decided to migrate either to low, mid, or high violence states, when compared to the wage differential that a migrant coming from a low violence state would have. In general, when migrants move from non-violent to violent states, they demand a salary 25% greater in order to increase the odds of migration in 10%. On the contrary, when migrants move from violent to non-violent states, they only demand an increase in their salary of 50%. In conclusion, the author's hypothesis can be confirmed. Migrants coming from violent states to non or less violent states are willing to sacrifice economic opportunities in order to gain safety, while those migrating from non-violent to violent states are driven by better economic opportunities and less expensive cost of living at destination, even if the rate of criminality is higher at their destination. To continue with this review, I would like to highlight some of the strengths of this paper. First, the paper fills some research and information gaps, providing evidence of the existence of IDP in Mexico that the governmental authorities can now address. Second, the smart and innovative use of a weighted approach to wage differentials that takes account of individual characteristics. This avoids the severe multicollinearity problems of the standard differential wage approach. And finally, this research provides better understanding on how migration flow works in Mexico. It identifies different types of migrants and the motivation behind their decision to migrate, which is better economic opportunities. Regarding the challenges of this research paper, the first one is that authors can improve the way that each state was classified according to the level of violence. They use homicide rate as an indicator for violence, but violence can exist in different forms, especially when gangs and drugs are around. For example, kidnapping, blackmailing, prostitution, among others. Second challenge is that throughout their paper, the authors focus on the role of the wage differential behind the migration decision to and from states with different level of violence, as they say on their objective. But I cannot find a specific answer to the question on their topic, do Mexicans flee for violence? it looks like Mexicans are actually fleeing from poverty. Finally, considering that pursuing economic opportunities seem to be shared by migrants coming from violent and non-violent states, a last challenge could be to consider some other factors influencing our migration decision, such as family reunification, poverty, among others. Well, I definitely enjoyed this research and agree with the results the authors obtained. Migration is a complex topic, and this research evidences its complexity in different dimensions. And that concludes my video. Thank you for listening and thank you for your time.